So, Harry, have you seen any of the recent Jeffrey Dahmer drama on Netflix?
The missus has watched some of it and said it was pretty brutal and horrifying to watch parts of, and also that a lot of people have been complaining about how brutal it is, and I can only say that you're watching a television show based around the exploits of a
Serial killing,
serial
cannibal,
killer.
paedophile.
So what did you expect?
Yeah, well, I didn't expect the amount of bloody wokery in it, and I know wokery
You've
is
kind
a
of got to expect it
tired phrase.
nowadays.
Well, yeah, I know it's an exhausted phrase, but wow, the race politics in this is really heavy, and I've got a lot of people trying to justify it, but you can't really justify a racial political message if it didn't exist in the first place, and it's literal fiction. So it turns out most of it's made up.
What a surprise. Can I just imagine the creative process coming up with this show, where you go, what if we do a fictionalized retelling of the exploits of Jeffrey Dahmer? And the executive producer just goes, but how will this help black people?
Black people?
Yeah.
Well, despite all of the attempts to make it insufferably politically correct, it turns out that Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, has transgressed the unquestionable, imperishable integrity of the LGBTQ AAIP plus community. So let's examine today why...
Did it suggest that gay people can do bad things too?
No, it didn't.
Oh, really?
No.
It goes even deeper.
We'll get into the ideology, poor choice of words, of that later. So let's examine why this is propagandistic nonsense. If you'd like to learn why Harry's missus, for example, likes true crime so much, you can watch the recent Contemplations
and probably
we did with
why
Josh.
your missus likes true crime so much as well.
Yeah, so we actually did one as a half a profile on Ted Bundy and his comedionic charisma, and then Josh went into the literature on the dark triad and its attractiveness. And in this, he read a paper called The Dark Side of the Rainbow and pointed out why... surveys of lesbian, gay, and bisexual people have higher dark triad traits. So
that's very interesting.
if you are someone who bats for the home team, be careful out there who you bring home. Anyway, speaking of which, the LGBTQ content label that Netflix has been applying to its content decided to be tagged on the Jeffrey Dahmer series.
I'm pretty based.
Masked off moment. There was a lot of whining from Pink News on this because there's always whining over at Pink News. No more Jeffrey Dahmer shows. He is being turned into an icon slowly and surely by people that think his story needs to be told over and over again, a user on social media said. It's insulting and horrible, not only to the LGBTQ plus community, but to all, in my opinion.
Right, okay, let me just say this. So-called LGBTQ plus community, if that is your real name. I know it's actually Pi, but anyway... Right, let me just ask this. If you don't... I'll say this. If you don't want to keep being associated with these people, stop making it so that, say, like Pennywise and other literal horror monsters are considered gay and queer icons. Do you remember when It Chapter 2 came out?
Yes.
And the opening scene, taken straight from the book, he kills a gay guy.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, gay Twitter was furious. I thought Pennywise was an ally! Why do you want Pennywise as an ally?
You sound like Ben Affleck in Batman v Superman. Pennywise, why did you say that name? Yeah, just stop dressing up as a Babadook and Pennywise on bloody RuPaul's Drag Race, which I didn't know until I had to cover it for a video that you'll be seeing later, so I'll hold my tongue on that. Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, outlines the chilling acts of murder, necrophilia, and cannibalism orchestrated by Dahmer, who later became known as the Milwaukee Cannibal. From 1978 to 1991, Dahmer is known to have killed at least 17 men, many of whom were underage and people of colour. For some reason, they're putting pedophilia on par with dating and killing black people, so that's a really weird conflation. It tells a story through the lives of the victims and focuses on how systemic racism and complacency by Milwaukee authorities allowed Dahmer to continue his killing spree. So the actual narrative of the show is all about how the police kept letting them down, the police were super racist. What it doesn't exactly examine very well is, if we go on to the next one, a viewer actually sent me this article from Unheard, why perhaps the gay lifestyle might have, or at least the LGBTQ plus community lifestyle, not the Douglas Murray gay men lifestyle, might have contributed to making these men vulnerable. I'm just going to read some quotes from this article and see if you get where I'm thinking here. Why gay men ignored Me Too. An explicit tweet about social etiquette at a condomless gay orgy recently went viral as the mostly heterosexual public grappled with the sheer perversity of what they were reading. It is unethical to attend a no loads refused, pimped out cum dump event if the bottom has blocked you on Twitter even though you've never talked to him and they have no idea why, ? Twitter freaked out. What exactly is a pimped-out cum dump event? How strict is this no loads refused policy? Is it an anonymous block really an undumpable load offence? While this dude's attempt to grapple with the social niceties of the orgy might seem a particularly extreme example, the online fora it attracted does seem to reflect a cultural misunderstanding of gay male sexuality. It is deemed problematic, an attitude that is often accompanied by a desire to do something about it.
This reminds me of something. This reminds me of just gargling loads of piss at my 15-man orgy, birthday orgy.
Why did I get
birthday
monkeypox? Maybe it's the consequences of my own actions.
You can't ask gay men to stop having sex with one another. AIDS didn't stop us, so monkeypox sure as hell won't.
I'm going to interject an interlude here before I read more of these comments and just point out that none of us are excusing the reprehensible actions of Jeffrey Dahmer. We're
Obviously
just like
not.
we wouldn't excuse the actions of an evil rapist following a woman home at night. However, we do think women should be armed with guns or pepper spray, and we think that we shouldn't allow women to walk home alone. That's why we order them a cab or make sure they text us that they get home safe. So in the same way that you cannot blame the victim for what these monsters do, you can tell potential victims you can't control how many monsters there are out there, and maybe take lifestyle precautions that won't leave you vulnerable to this kind of thing.
And
I don't know.
Sadly, in the UK, it's far, like you've just referenced there, it's far too difficult to be able to defend yourself legitimately. And in the UK, for those of our American viewers who don't know, we're not even legally allowed to carry pepper spray, for instance. It's
or a pocket knife
pathetic.
or anything. Yeah, but in this case, when you have comparable strength levels, maybe don't get really drugged up and drunk and go home with a guy that you don't know what he's going to do to you in his locked apartment.
Mate, AIDS wouldn't stop them, so monkeypox and serial killers won't either.
So, soon after the Me Too movement kicked off in 2017, there were calls to look beyond violence of men against women to include the perceived toxic sexual norms among gay men. Camila Martinez Granata wrote in Vice about pervasive sexual harassment in gay bars, where getting groped and squeezed without warning is practically a rite of passage. She called for the fostering of, quote, two truly safe spaces in queer nightlife, ones that rejected the, quote, normalization of sexual harassment. A year later, Michael Segalov wrote in The Guardian that, quote, the conversation around consent for gay men has been stifled. Some of the statistics cited in these articles depict an epidemic of sexual assault within gay spaces. Half of gay men in both the UK and US say they've experienced sexual touching without their consent. Researchers have also noticed the normalization of, quote, sexual coercion among gay men, defined broadly as, quote, a range of ways in which men may be forced or pressured to have unwanted sex. Examples include pressure to accept undesired top or bottom positions for the satisfaction of one's sexual partner. Gay bars and clubs known for their, quote, seedy undercurrent because of their primary function, much more so than heterosexual spaces, is to enable sexual conquest. This is why the presence of women in gay bars is seen as so ruinous, and why the rise of hookup culture like Grindr threaten the long-term viability of these supposed, quote, safe spaces. So, safe spaces to be sexually harassed. Weird. The perennial art of, quote, cruising, seeking out strange men in sex clubs, saunas, and public toilets, once rationalized as a form of self-hatred, is now clearly misunderstood as simply what many gay men like to do.
Well, clearly understood. You said misunderstood. Sorry, just to correct.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
My point is, Dahmer used bathhouses to drug people until they threw him out. He used gay clubs to pick up potential victims. He was literally cruising down streets, as was John Wayne Gacy, picking up vulnerable young men who were drugged out in bus stations or, according to academics, had been thrown out of their houses because their parents weren't tolerant enough of them being gay. Do you think there might be a small problem with the promiscuity and drug taking in the gay male community that might, just might, leave you susceptible to the worst people on earth?
Gay men didn't do nothing.
Frustratingly, but then if we keep telling them that, then
It's
they're going to...
society's fault, Connor.
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, frustrating. If they're going to keep getting themselves killed, which I
And
don't
just
want.
just to confirm as well, all of that was listed out there is after the destigmatization of homosexuality.
Yes, it's
in the West.
post-sexual revolution. And he's actually saying in this that the Me Too movement is implacable to gay men because they actually kind of like the roughness. So all of these things, like the sexual harassment and the groping, is just part and parcel of gay culture.
Well, I say this a bit. I lived in Manchester for a bit,
Yeah.
okay, and I knew plenty of somewhat degenerate gay people, and I will say, kind of checks out,
It's frustrating.
sadly.
So just to set the stage for then looking at the factual inaccuracies in the Dahmer drama, I watched all 10 episodes. I'm
sorry.
From the start, Netflix opens with a clip of supposed police brutality and profiling. It capitalizes the B in black in all the subtitles. Tony, the deaf man, who was also black, that Dahmer kills in probably the most tragic episode, he had layers of intersectional critique for his race, his sexuality, and his disability. It was almost an entirely deaf episode with sign language and subtitles and lots of effeminate gay subculture
I mean,
language, which I found difficult.
That sounds like an interesting filming technique.
It was a very interesting filming technique. The only thing is, it was clearly given prominence because of the different layers of identity persecution that they were trying to blame on Dahmer, even though he didn't kill him because he was gay or
done in service of the
disabled.
message rather than in service of the medium.
Yeah, then the role of the police officers, there was a black police officer who was interrogating him and said, you didn't target these men because they were in low-income neighborhoods that you lived around. You moved there purposefully to kill black men, you racist. And Dahmer was like, no. And in real life, and I'm not defending Jeffrey Dahmer, I'm merely trying to
See what you're making us do, Netflix.
Yeah, we're trying to accurately depict the reasons for his chosen victims, hopefully to prevent it. He just said, I thought they were beautiful. He had a taste for non-white men, so whatever. Then there were the other side of it, was the police officers who failed to pick up on the fact that there was a 14-year-old boy he had drilled the side of his head into and poured acid in there. They thought he was his boyfriend, and they just made them out to be really homophobic and hating Asian people. And they actually had police officers make anonymous threatening calls to the Laotian family after their son had died, even though that never happened either.
Wait. So you're telling me that the whole thing is like, yeah, Dahmer was gay and he was a serial killer, but don't you know he was a racist?
Yeah,
And
the entire show. And this is why it's so warped. The progressive stack, much like the German cannibal, for example, who was the consensual cannibal, the progressive sexual morality of Foucault, who literally raped young boys in graveyards to the point of where he died of AIDS, cannot argue against some of the things Dahmer does. They can argue against the murder. They cannot argue against the rape and the cannibalism, because in the consent-based sexual morality that the left have, those are not evil. So they actually have to slap the racist label on him to make him reprehensible. It is utterly, utterly insane.
Netflix going, no one would think this was a bad guy unless he was a racist. I mean, come on. What if the guy consented to being murdered?
Yeah, and then the other villains in the show are cops or co-workers of Glenda, his next door neighbor.
So the sorts of people who, in the real world, were dedicated to tracking him down.
Pretty much, yeah. Glenda's co-worker complains about her doing an interview on the Dahmer case, saying, this is a very conservative business with a very conservative clientele, you shouldn't have said those things. And they try and make Jesse Jackson look really good, even though he's a massive race hustler.
I mean, good luck to you.
Yeah, exactly. So, if we can just highlight one small problem with all this stuff. It's all made up. Loads of it's made up. Turns out. So we go on to the next one. One small problem, it's just basically all fiction. This is everything Netflix's Dahmer series got wrong about the case. So, for example, its lead character, Glenda Cleveland, she didn't exist.
Oh,
yeah.
That's a good start.
So, Glenda Cleveland was actually based on two people, right? The real-life Glenda, there was a woman who lived across the street from Jeffrey Dahmer and phoned in about the kid who has his head drilled in. Right? And she did tell the police, I think he might be a kid. And the police said, it's a tiff with his boyfriend. He looks older. They depicted the police in the thing of basically walking to his apartment, seeing blood and like a drill everywhere and just going, that's some gay stuff. And it's like, okay.
That's accidentally based?
Yeah. And then he didn't have a next door neighbor that looked into it. He actually had a neighbor that lived at multiple doors down from him. There was no complaint about smell. There was no complaint about noise. Nobody knew of the murder the whole time, which is the implication here that they used to blame the police and ignoring black voices. It was another woman called Pamela Bass who Dahmer had tried to give a human meat sandwich to, but she didn't eat it. Yeah.
Fair play to her instincts there.
Yeah.
Don't accept a strange meat sandwich.
This also goes for the gay men that we were giving advice to earlier. But the entire framing device of this narrative is bollocks. Didn't happen. Sorry, there wasn't a black neighbor who always knew and was overlooked by police because of her race. She didn't live next to him. She wasn't smelling the smell. You could talk about police incompetence of allowing a 14-year-old boy to be killed, thinking that he was an older man and that they're having a lover's quarrel. That's a totally fine criticism. But I don't want to be lied to. I'd rather you accurately depicted things like this, because otherwise we can't fight horrific criminals like this and profile them properly.
Yeah, I think one of the most insidious things about this is that, sadly, as much as I would like for it to not be the case, a lot of people do take their understanding of the world from films and television.
Yep.
And they shouldn't. Yep. You shouldn't do that, because it's written by somebody who may have an agenda and may want to trick you in some way. But loads of people do, and most people will watch this and go, oh my God, this must have been how it actually happened. Can you believe that they just didn't listen to the poor black people?
Yeah. Yeah, and they also apparently didn't listen to the Laotian people, even though the judge was not discriminating against the Laotian father in the show in real life, because he didn't actually attend the hearing where Dahmer initially got a sexual assault charge on his first son, and then the second son was killed. So they just had him be there and the judge be racist because say, I can't understand you when you don't speak English. There were two police officers who didn't actually, unlike the series portray them, get Officer of the Year outstanding service medals for overlooking the Laotian boy who was 14 being taken back to Dahmer's flat. They were suspended. They were later reinstated, which you can obviously argue isn't good, but they didn't get accolades and rewarded for their poor behaviour. So it's just another lie. Tony Hughes and Jeffrey Dahmer actually knew each other for 2 years before he was killed. So the deaf man didn't know him for a short amount of time. It wasn't a really intense and tragic relationship. It was actually, they knew him for a couple of years. They just admitted that fact. Again, they're just changing things, so it calls the entire narrative into question. And Glenda Cleveland's daughter in this, she gets arrested at one point for knocking a man's camera out of his hand because he's posing for Jeffrey Dahmer photos on the steps of the building.
Because
after
cops
he's
be
arrested.
racist?
Yeah, never happened. No record of
it
arrest. Didn't happen. They just made it up. So if we go on to the next one, literally the journalist who broke the story says there's loads wrong in it. She says, I walked up to Dahmer's apartment, stuck my head in because you're a journalist. I guess the thing is that was strange that it didn't look strange. She said the officers slowly began to understand the magnitude of the crime scene when they discovered Polaroids of victims in various stages of dismemberment, but she didn't find the smell of a dead body. She'd been covering crime scenes, so she knew the smell of a dead body. All it smelled was like chemicals. So again, myth busts the idea that the neighbours always knew and the police were overlooking them just because they're racist. She also said she used to work in communications for the Milwaukee Police Department, and she said that the depiction of police officers as racist and homophobic was incorrect. I've spent a lot of time with them, interviewing the people who were on the scene. Again, this is a dramatisation, but at a time when it is not exactly easy for law enforcement to get trust and buy-in from this community, it's not a very helpful representation. In the first 5 minutes of the episode, you have Glenda Cleveland knocking on his door. None of that ever happened. I've had trouble with the buy-in because I knew this was not accurate, but people are watching that way. They're watching it for entertainment. And so because their guard is down, because they're watching true crime as a sort of escapist way of identifying predators, they're very receptive for all this sort of political messaging, which wasn't actually true. Even the victims' families themselves dispute this, and they don't like the dramatization. If we go on to the next one, the woman who showed up at his trial and screamed emotively that she hated him, that this is what real losing control was like, not this cold, calculated veneer you have trying to do your insanity plea, which is really harrowing to watch, actually. She said, I was never contacted about the show. I feel like Netflix should have asked if we minded or how we felt about making it. They didn't ask me anything. They just did it. I'm not money hungry, and that's what this show is about. Netflix is just trying to get paid. I could even understand if they gave some of the money to the victims' children, not necessarily their families. I mean, I'm old, I'm very comfortable, but the victims have children and grandchildren. If the show benefited them in some way, it wouldn't feel so harsh and careless. It's sad they're just making money off this tragedy. That's just greed. And it turns out propaganda is very profitable.
Yes, and it's not just that they're... It's even worse because they're not just propagandizing just for the sake of it, although they are doing that.
Yeah.
They're making the money off it and then supposedly saying that they're doing it in the name of the benefit of the black community in America, while actively not consulting any of the people who were involved, not involving them in the process at all, not clearing things with them. It is pretty evil.
Yeah, and it's also, if you're making content to raise awareness about gay men being killed, perhaps advise them not to put themselves in compromising positions, because poor choice of words, I know, but I'd prefer they didn't get murdered, because I don't really like serial killing paedophile cannibals. Shocking. Controversial opinion, I know. If we go on to the next one, this isn't unique to true crime content on Netflix. As you've seen with Mindhunter Season 2, they actually try and suggest that Wayne Williams was not guilty of the Atlanta child murders, which is really infuriating.
This was really annoying because I really like Mindhunter, and I noticed that this started to happen towards the latter half of Season 2, where it suddenly becomes very bogged down in this Wayne Williams story, whereas some of the other previous episodes had like one-and-done stories where they're examining someone. And it felt very particular to Wayne Williams because it felt like they were trying to imply that he wasn't guilty. And it was also after David Fincher, the creator of the show, seems to have very visibly taken a step away from the show. So his guiding creative vision of it seems to have been diminished. He might have put it in the hands of other executive producers who, rather than making a really interesting show about serial killers and the FBI agents tracking them down, decided they wanted to put some political messaging in there. But even then they did a terrible job because even as presented in the show, they use the language of cinema and the music to try and make it seem like, is what's his name, Ford, is that his name, the main character? Is Ford wrong about Wayne? Is he doing this? But everything that happens in it is very clear that yes, this guy did it. And to the point where they have to put up a black card after the show has finished saying like, I guess we'll never know.
Yeah. It coincided with the investigation, the reopening of the case by Mayor Lance Bottoms of Georgia, trying to look into who actually did it, because there were all these claims you saw in the show of the KKK did it, and they weren't the black churchgoers who were at the rally that the mayor and the police commissioner said, oh, we're going to find this, started emotively jumping up and down knowing, it's the Klan, it's the Klan. Meanwhile, in real life, Wayne Williams failed 3 polygraph tests, not decisive proof, but he does come across as a narcissist. His unique carpet fibers and dog hair were found on multiple victims. He was found at the scene of a crime, possibly dumping a body off a bridge when it was found days later. Upstream from it, he had a so-called music recruitment business that used young children who were the exact age and demographic of all of the victims, but it never materialized. There was no actual studio time booked in. And in an interview with CNN a few years later, he implied that he had CIA training at 19 on how to strangle a man to death. Safe to say he's probably the culprit.
No, it's just because he's black, mate.
Yeah, is it
It's
because I
just
is
racist. The FBI was just profiling him, bro.
And one last one, just to go on to an article I wrote quite a while ago, actually, way before I was here. I don't know if you've seen Netflix's You.
Sadly, once again, the missus has subjected me to parts of it.
Okay, so season 1, I actually quite liked.
I've got something similar as well after this, but carry on.
Okay, so season 1 I quite liked, especially because a book collector with poor taste in women, I could not relate to that main character, to the point where my sister was saying, oh, you're a bit like Joe. It's a bit awkward. But in season 3, he has a family, settles down in the suburbs, immediately starts cheating, the character assassinate him. The worst part is actually that they introduce him to an anti-vaxxer, so their kid gets ill, and Gail, I believe is... Oh, no, Jill, who hosts a science birthday party as well for his kids, so it's kind of contradictory character there, says, oh, I'm against vaccines, which we obviously do not endorse, YouTube. And they use that as the excuse as to why it's justified to kill him. And throughout other seasons, Joe has spoken about hating Trump supporters, being a feminist, all of his friends are LGBT allies and
Stop
trans.
making serial killers and horror movie monsters allies.
Yes.
If you want us to
Stop
take
it.
you more seriously, stop valorizing clearly evil people.
They're trying to prime you to have certain forms of violence be legitimate against your political enemies. That's all this is. And that's all the Dahmer show is. It's about racial propaganda. That's all Mindhunter was. It's to suggest the police are racist. They are trying to reprogram you. And so, if you'd like some nourishing true crime content...
And it's also what the Santa Clarita Diet is, if you've ever watched that.
No,
I have
haven't.
sadly been put through that. And it's a woman in Santa Clarita in California becomes a zombie, and all of her victims that she chooses are overt caricatures and straw men of Trump voters, who are, of course, Nazis, men's rights activists, who are, of course, just misogynists, who hate their wives, and anybody else under the sun that you can imagine being a leftist straw man that they want to beat up. And, of course, all of these people die in horribly gruesome and graphically violent ways.
This is why I'm going to do a scripted video at some point on horror movies in modern day being feminist power fantasies, like Midsummer. So if you'd like to watch some actually nourishing true crime content, go check out this this video on either YouTube or our website, The Killer Clowns of Leftism, where I explore the life and crimes of John Wayne Gacy. And if you'd like to watch that rather than the Dahmer case, because the Dahmer case gives you some very incorrect political conclusions, watch this and give some takeaway on how to actually defend our kids from the monsters and boogeymen lurking beneath their beds and in libraries. But until next time, I just suppose cancel your Netflix subscription. It's rubbish.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the premium book clubs we do, this one on Giovanni Gentili's The Origins of the Doctrine of Fascism. And you want to find out what else Carl's putting out, you can follow him on Getter, at Carl Benjamin on Getter. Thank you, and goodbye.